6 o'clock. Right now it's time for the big story. So the JLP, the Jamaica Labour Party, has dismissed the PNP's protest yesterday against Dennis Chung's appointment as Chief Technical Director of the Financial Investigations Division, the FID, calling it vulgar and inappropriate. The JLP insists that the government will not be bullied into rescinding the appointment, citing Chung's qualifications and experience. Who do you think we have this morning? Mr. Marlon Morgan, the senior member of the JLP Communications Task Force and recently appointed senator. We say good morning and welcome, Marlon. How are you today, my brother?
Hi, good morning, Richie B. Good morning to your listeners. I am well, and I trust that your listeners, yes, are in good order this morning.
All right. Now, Marlon, you have described the happenings yesterday, the demonstrations by the PNP, as vulgar and inappropriate. I don't think they're going to like that description of what they were out there doing. What did you see in the demonstration, the protest, that made you feel that it was vulgar and inappropriate?
Well, I have to start out by concurring with you, Richie. I do not think the PNP will concur with or find favor with our characterization of their desperate, reckless, vulgar, and irresponsible protest yesterday. So just to be very clear, each of us, as law-abiding Jamaicans possessing our constitutional rights, are free to protest and register our views on issues. Now, the point being made by us in the JLP is that the PNP's protest, the call that was made at their press conference last Thursday by their General Secretary for the government to rescind Dennis Chung's appointment to the FID, is a call that we believe is clearly inappropriate. It is asking the government literally to do something that is not within the powers of government to do, and it is asking the government to do something that is improper and irregular, because Dennis Chung is not a political appointee. It was not the government that appointed Dennis Chung, and therefore the government has no locus standi, as it were, to unduly insert itself and intervene in a matter that is properly the remit of and the prerogative of the Public Service Commission. We are at a point in this country, to be, where we no longer have a Bobby Pickersgill accreditation committee where the PNP used in an organized and calculated way the institutions of the state to corrupt our civil service by vetting people to ensure that only card-carrying and persons sympathetic to the PNP could serve and be approved to serve in the civil service. That's what happened in the 1970s, following the 1976 general elections. And we are where we are now in terms of having a fit-for-purpose mechanism that objectively receives applications from candidates who are eminently qualified and suitable to take a particular job, and following a competitive recruitment process, that meritorious recruitment process, Dennis Chung emerged, and the PSC has a superintendent over the process. It was the Office of the Services Commission that handled the recruitment, and the PNP had a protest where it is literally calling on the government to do something that is improper and not in the power of government to do. And the truth of the matter is that, as all Jamaica saw yesterday morning, the PNP's protest action was aimed at tearing down one of our Jamaican brothers, someone who has served this country with distinction, I would submit, in both the public sector and the private sector. So much so that in a previous dispensation, it was the PNP itself that looked to Dennis Chung to go and solve the melee at the National Solid Waste Management Authority in 2015 when Portia Simpson Miller served as Prime Minister.
Now, Marlon, you also from the JLP, it seems, had a protest, albeit a smaller number yesterday, close enough to National Heroes Circle. Was there anything in the JLP's protest that would make the PNP describe it as vulgar and inappropriate, or were you all well behaved?
Well, the truth of the matter is that when you have a set of folks in the politics attending upon a certain space, by virtue of our political history, yes, and how confrontational aspects of our politics can be. Ideally, it would be preferable to have left that space to them. It was good, however, that yesterday's protest and the quote-unquote counter-protest went off incident-free and without undue antagonism and confrontation between both sides. I wasn't there physically myself. I gather that there was a throng of JLP supporters, persons clad in JLP paraphernalia, some of them in neutral colors, but they were bearing placards, drawing attention to the PNP's hypocrisy with a number of messages, to include messages involving Melissa Silveira and so on. But they were further toward the southern end of Hero Circle, whereas the PNP had assembled more in the vicinity of the Ministry of Finance and the Public Service building, which is more northward.
Okay. Now,
so it was good that there wasn't that undue confrontation.
Absolutely, and I was a little worried about that. Now,
because just to be clear, but before we move from this point,
yes.
don't lose your question or your train of thought.
No problem.
But just before we move from this question, the Prime Minister had used the opportunity at a meeting he spoke at in Marlene, Malabu Fort's St. James West Central constituency Sunday evening to urge labor rights and indeed other well-thinking and right-thinking Jamaicans to come out and register their protest. The protest that the Prime Minister called labor rights to was not a physical protest per se. It's a protest where they would don their JLP colors for those persons who can put on the party's paraphernalia. They were invited so to do and stand in their own spaces and register our pushback against what the PNP was seeking to do. Because in our view, the PNP's protest is simply to distract the public from the achievements and the work that the government is doing to advance the welfare of the Jamaican people, whether it is in relation to crime management, whether it is in relation to poverty reduction. The very things that the PNP doesn't want to see the government achieving for Jamaica is what they are trying to distract the Jamaican people from. And the Prime Minister is saying the time is now for the Jamaica Labour Party to push back in the strongest terms against the PNP's deception, their envy and bad mind, and of course the things that they do to essentially undermine the progress of the people, as the opposition leader did 2 Sundays ago when he referred to the Morant Bay Urban Centre as a so-called centre. It's not a so-called centre. We all see it before our eyes.
Okay.
I haven't been there physically, but I see it on TV.
Right. I don't know if it's a case where the Prime Minister was not as clear as he ought to have been, but in a conversation yesterday morning with Peter Bunting, he expressed some degree of concern because he was of the view, it seems, that the Prime Minister was calling for massive counter-protest, and then the concern of how that might turn out seemed to have been on their minds. But you're saying that the Prime Minister was basically referring to persons wearing their colour and letting their voice be heard in their own space.
As he said in his actual speech, because he said pretty much those things. He invited persons, whether they're going to their workplace, because if you go to your workplace and you're donned in green, an article of green, whether it's your green earring, green blouse, you name it, you can, do that. That is what. And many persons responded in that vein. I did so myself, separate and apart from my green shirt that I would have donned at the JLP press conference yesterday. But just to be very clear, Richie, Peter Bunting's quote-unquote concern, in my view, is misplaced concern, because the very nature and the legacy of the Prime Minister does not accord with irresponsible cause or irresponsible action. In fact, Peter Bunting is being hypocritical because his General Secretary, speaking a few weeks ago in Darliston, Westmoreland, told comrades that when people go low, they must go lower. And I didn't hear Peter Bunting register any concern in relation to Dayton Campbell's most vulgar and despicable call. And it's an observation I made at the JLP press conference yesterday morning, because the truth of the matter is that those of us who serve and hold positions of leadership in the country have to lead by example and have to do things that are appropriate and befitting, such that others looking on can take a leaf out of our book. And no Jamaican can say within themselves, especially on a morning like this, that Dayton Campbell is someone they can look on or would want their child to look on and model his behavior. And so Peter Bunting, who in the Senate a few Fridays ago essentially misrepresented and impugned not just public servants, but a contractor who he alleged had not been paid, and therefore works on Prattville Primary and Infant School was not being done in a timely manner because the contractor essentially was not being paid. He misrepresented the facts and, of course, injured the reputation of the contractor, as it were, as he did with the technical members, because he told the minister in the Senate a few Fridays ago that the technical team, the hard-working civil servants at the Ministry of Education, were basically misleading her. So Peter Bunting is not a man who Jamaica should hold in any high esteem. He's a gentleman who varies.
Let me get back on track. Let me get back on track to what some of the things that I want to get out this morning, Marlon.
Not a problem.
Now, as a party, how do you justify the removal, going back to the advertisement that was put in the papers for the position that Dennis Chung now has? How do you justify the removal of the law enforcement experience requirement from the job advertisement for the FID Chief Technical Director position? Is there a way to justify that?
All right. So just to be clear,
yes,
it would be for the Public Service Commission.
No, I'm aware of that. Yes, I'm aware of that.
Well, let me do this, because I'm getting to your substantive question, Richie. It would be for the Public Service Commission through the Office of the Services Commission to indicate to the public the precise basis and rationale as to why there's a variation between the November advertisement in relation to the job of Chief Technical Director at FID and the January advertisement. But just to be very clear, it may well have been a case, and this is conjecture on my part here now. It may well have been a case where, based on the applications they received, they didn't find favor in terms of the depth and the wideness of the pool, and therefore they wanted to widen the pool in that January round, or having regard to the January attempt at recruitment. But separate and apart from that, it is to be absolutely clear that where all things are concerned, a person who holds law enforcement qualifications or experience and is essentially working in the area of financial investigations is someone who is trained by persons who are accounting professionals in the first place. The principal skill set in relation to financial investigations has to be skill sets that touch on concern accounting. And I'm putting it to you and the listeners this morning, Richie B, that had any other Jamaican possessing the very same qualifications, experience, and skill sets that Dennis Chung possesses, had attained this job, the point being made by the PNP, the selective outrage being expressed and exhibited by the PNP would not be exhibited. In other words, the PNP is really attacking Dennis Chung because they view Dennis Chung as someone who is just a card-carrying comrade and someone over whom they have no particular control. He speaks freely. This is a gentleman who has been in the public domain several years and decades over, speaking and presenting on media programs such as this as a financial analyst and as a public affairs commentator. And the PNP's problem is that they cannot control, in their view, I believe, Dennis Chung, because if any other Jamaican had the qualifications that Dennis had, the PNP wouldn't be protesting outside of the Ministry of Finance. In fact, there are five previous holders of this office, Richie B. Yes, I wanted to not spare me the time to indicate to your listeners that Sharon Crooks,
yes,
a lady who she was serving when I worked at the Ministry of Finance. She served as the financial secretary, but she got to become financial secretary having served a stint as head of the FID between 2002, I gather, to 2008. So when I went to finance as an advisor to Aldershaw in 2009, Sharon Crooks had been serving as my financial secretary at the time. There is also Pamela Folks. She's a chartered accountant. And by the way, Sharon Crooks is someone who had accounting training at the first degree level, and she had a master's degree. Yes, an MBA, rather. Pamela Folks is a chartered accountant. Yes. Keith Darien, a gentleman who also served as head of the FID, is an accountant with a master's in accounting. The person who just acted in the post following Selvin Hayes demitting office last July, Richie B, was Ordina Tucker, a gentleman by the name Ordina Tucker. He has acted for just about a year, and this gentleman is an ICT specialist. And of course, there's Robin Sykes, who also served as the head of FID, who is an attorney at law in terms of primary training and skill set. So there are persons, I'm putting it to you, and these are incontrovertible facts. There are 5 persons who have previously held the office of head of the FID who did not have any law enforcement background, because even on the November advert that the PNP and its surrogates parading as civil society or organizations are overlooking. Mm-hmm. In the advertisement, it speaks to law enforcement or equivalent qualifications. So the point is that there are other skill sets and competencies and qualifications that could be considered and are to be considered in relation to determining the suitability of a candidate.
Okay.
Dennis Strong is a suitable candidate. He has already started the job, quite frankly, as he should have. And the PNP should not be calling on the government to rescind his appointment, because the government has no power so to do. It is an unlawful, illegal, and improper thing that the PNP is calling on the government to do.
All right. Let's take the politics out of it for a moment. Forget about, the reaction to this appointment from the People's National Party. But just, I want you to just address the average Jamaican out there right now who is not even necessarily big on the politics. In terms of going forward, do you believe that with Dennis's appointment, investigations can be conducted fairly and without bias? And or what do you say to other persons who might believe somehow that his appointment is part of a larger attempt to cover up financial irregularities involving the Prime Minister? What do you say to those persons?
First of all, Richard, all of us as Jamaicans are entitled to our good name and our reputation. Yes. Dennis Strong, as a public figure, as it were, someone who, as I indicated earlier in this conversation, having served as a member, provided service rather in both the public sector and in the private sector, is someone who has not been associated unduly with any corruption or any scandal in the past. I have had no knowledge of Dennis Strong in respective capacities in which he has served, most recently being as General Secretary of JFF, doing anything that is untoward. So the gentleman's integrity and the clear professionalism over the years stand tall and speaks for itself, in my view. And just to be very clear, as I said at the JLP press conference yesterday, the FID, in terms of its structures and the units that serve the organization, remains the same today as it did 2 weeks ago and as it will 3 months from now, because the institution has a mandate and the institution has the structures and the resources that supports its work. Dennis Strong, as Chief Technical Director, is not someone who will be doing the investigations, as it were, at FID. He will provide the strategic direction and overall superintendence over the organization. But among the units at the FID, Richie B, is the Financial Investigations Team, the Financial Intelligence Unit. It has a Legal Services Unit, Information Technology Unit, Planning and Administrative Services Unit. So it has all of these requisite units that enable its functionality as an organization. It's a division of the Ministry of Finance, and Dennis Strong's appointment does not diminish, negate, or erode in any way, shape, or form the institutional underpinnings at the FID. It will be able to discharge its mandate tomorrow and today as it did 2 weeks ago or 3 months ago.
Okay. Finally, and I'm just giving you a few seconds, if you can just tell me whether or not you have any word whatsoever on what I believe was a forensic audit that was done by an overseas team in relation to the Prime Minister's financials. Any word on that whatsoever? It has not been published. Do you know where it's at?
Well, you're correct, Richard B. The Integrity Commission would have spent, we gather, millions of dollars of Jamaicans' taxpayers' resources to engage the services. We don't know the basis on which they did so. We don't know whether the Integrity Commission followed and honored the appropriate public procurement channels so to do. And we, as you have quite rightly said, we have not been advised as to who the accountant was, and we have not gotten the report, certainly. I gather that report was submitted to FID, and indeed, the FID will, in keeping with the recommendation, and the referral rather, not recommendation, in keeping with Kevin Stevenson's referral from the IC to the FID, I believe that the FID's body of work would be, ensuing even as we speak, but the public has not been apprised of certain particulars regarding that report from the forensic auditor into the Prime Minister's statutory declarations. But I don't want to be preemptive of the process. The FID has a body of work to do. We know that the Prime Minister has a certain matter that he is pursuing in the court, because in our view, and I reiterate that this morning, Kevin Stevenson of the Integrity Commission had an obligation to either refer, based on his investigations, the matter to the then Director of Corruption Prosecution for her ruling, or certify the declarant via the Director of Information and Complaints, Mr. Craig Beresford. He elected to do neither of those things, I believe, in a very curious way, because I suspect he had a particular agenda and a particular motivation. And he, having left the Prime Minister languishing, I believe that he has left the Prime Minister in a state of being inconclusive and not certified for certain, so much so that there are persons who can be making all kinds of political jabs in relation to this matter and exploiting it for partisan and politically contrived motivations and reasons.
Marlon Morgan, Senator Morgan, thanks for your time this morning, and you have a good day. All the best.
All the best, Richard.
All right, take care.